Welcome to The Joe Show, a podcast with insight and opinion on the information you need to know, with your host, Joe Blyan.
Hello out there, Tanse, Manabu. Samina, this is The Joe Blyan Show. Niti Mamskote, I want to talk about the settlements. Some people have been calling me about the settlements, and I also met a couple of people from my travels during the Métis Nation campaign that were wanting to get involved and so forth. So I think it's only fair that I respond to them, and I did get some calls as well, see if I could do some information or maybe talk about the settlements and in my podcast. And I want to do that tonight. And I'm sitting here at my son's place. He is my producer. And he asked me to kind of give an outline of what is the settlements. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, those of you guys who are listening, and many of you that are in the settlements in Alberta, throughout the whole province of Canada, we are the only province that have Métis settlements. And they were acquired through a great deal of negotiations back in probably starting from the 1800s when the Riel was trying to lay land claims. But back in the early 20s and 30s, particularly in the 20s, that there were some people by the name of Jim Brady and Francis Joseph Dion, Felix Callio, and Thompson, and Malcolm Norris, they always usually call the Big Five. They had a vision that the Métis people should have land in Alberta, someplace where they can call home. Because First Nations were taken care of, they had land and reservations and so forth. But the Métis people were known as road lounge Indians and living on government land and so forth. And of course there was a lot of government territories in those days. They claimed it themselves. So therefore, but the truth of the matter is that when this happened, that there was a great deal of concern in Alberta and Saskatchewan. From what I understand, in the early years when I talked to a lot of old people, and I had an opportunity to talk to many elders in my time, and they said that the original claim to putting Métis settlements was done in Saskatchewan, but the government of Saskatchewan refused that offer, and so the group came to Alberta and see if they can get away with that, and they did make some claims, but nothing happened until I'm not sure about this, but the Ewan Commission was established by the government of Alberta to study the Métis problem of not having lands and so forth. So this was the big job for the Big Five, as they call them. And from what I can understand, from what I heard from the elders and so forth. And then from there it went on to arguing for those properties. Apparently there was 12 pieces of real estate throughout the whole province of Alberta that were called the Métis settlements. For some reason, later on in the years, I'm not too sure about that. Perhaps some of you guys that are listening to this program can go into a study and find out what happened for them. But there are 8 existing Métis settlements from Fishing Lake, Elizabeth, Kigano, Buffalo Lake, East Prairie, Gift Lake, and Paddle Prairie, and what's the name of the other one? I can't remember. Anyway, there's 8 of them, and I think after they negotiate for this land, and that happened, it started by the Métis Nation of Alberta. And initially, it established itself from St. Paul, and later on it became the Métis Nation of Alberta. And that were the 5 board of directors there that I just mentioned earlier, who really should be commended for making sure that the Métis people has some land to stand on. And that's what we call Métis settlements today. And thanks to people like Malcolm Norris, Jim Brady, Francis Joseph Dion, Felix Callio, and Tompkins, Peter Tompkins. And like I said, they were the people that made it possible for us to have land today where we live in the settlements. From there on, the Métis Nation went on to exist, and for many, many years the Métis Nation existed by having members in the settlements. They were the board of directors. If you can go back and think about that, and even up to date, there was a lot of Métis settlement because you knew where the Métis were if you went to a settlement. Many of us were living all over the province and probably were not accessible, probably isolated in some areas, so we didn't get to participate as much as the Métis settlements did in the early years. Up to the point of 1960, I remember, when there was a big assembly happening in Lake St. Anne. And the reason that election happened at the time, I'm not sure what the reason was, but the young man by the name of Stan Daniels was elected. And from that day on, the nation woke up, perhaps because of his ability to lead, or perhaps it was time for Métis people to wake up and smell the coffee. But the nation woke up that time, and from there on, for the next 10 years, Stan made sure that the Métis people did wake up. And many of these settlements were on the board of directorship. I remember that, because that you could easily find Métis people in the settlements, but many people didn't even know that the Blyans, 11 brothers and the mom and dad lived in Vermilion. Nobody knew that. Many places, like many other small towns where Métis people had to make a living working for farmers and labor jobs and stuff like that, because we had no homes. And the only home we had was the Métis settlements. That's the only land base we had. And those of us that could afford homes, yes, and land, we did. But the majority of us were still road lounge half-breeds, road lounge Indians as they called us. So when that happened, Stan, in my opinion, is a hero, because he woke up the Métis Nation. The Métis settlements came alive. People all over the province came alive. I came alive. And when this happened, folks, nobody ever gives the credit to the right people. And when that happened, many of us came together and we established the friendship centers, Native Court Worker Services. We did the employment service programs, and many other programs I can't even remember. I remember in the early days, that's where I got my experience with the Alberta Native Communication Society, because I worked for them for the next 10 years, and that's why I'm able to relate to you guys of my knowledge of the history of the movement of the Aboriginal people since the 70s. And that's because they hired me to be the pre-radio broadcasters for Alberta Native Communication Society. And those were people like Willie Ladisher, people like Ernest House, people like Adrian Hope, and many of them that had believed in me. And that's where I got my knowledge. That's why I'm able to do this broadcast, because I learned all my knowledge from the elders, not from textbooks and universities where I tell them they're full of shit. I'm the one that learned from the elders, and I know a lot of things a lot of people don't know. That's why I'm able to tell you how we evolved into the system where the settlements and the Métis Nation broke apart. Going forward, ladies and gentlemen, I remember I was the vice president, Stan Daniels, when the settlements came into the office, and they said, we want to get away from those security we have in our settlements, where they had supervisors in each settlement running settlements, and they wanted to administer their own settlements. I remember Stan Daniels saying, yes, you should, and we will help you every way we can to do so. And that one was Federation was first established. They were always established when they came and seen us. And I also remember, because I was the vice president, out of our board of directors of 12, 8 of them had to excuse themselves from voting because 8 of them were from the settlements. And also, there was only 4 of us that approved that we gave them the money, $42,000 to get the Federation. They did not get it from government. They got it from the Métis Nation of Alberta, which was justified and the right thing to do. I remember Stan doing that. He encouraged us to do that. And therefore, folks, that's why I know today the settlements and the Métis Nation are of the same. Later on the years, as things went by, they were administering their own settlements, and the settlements started to pick up. And it was later on the years that some other leadership started to turn tail, and they went against the Métis Nation. But I just wanted to tell you, folks, those of you on the settlement, you owe your responsibilities to the Métis Nation because they're the ones that started. There is no such thing as Métis settlement half-breeds. We're all half-breeds. We're all Métis. And that's the reason I'm telling you guys the story. I was there, I witnessed it, and I know who caused it, but I ain't going to mention that name. I want you guys to know we're all half-breeds, and we have to work together. Hi, that's what now.
You've been listening to The Joe Show with your host, Joe Blyan. If you have a comment, story, or a suggestion, you can send those off to joeblyan1@gmail.com. That's joeblyan1@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.